From Microbe TV, this is Office Hours. I'm Vincent Racaniello, and today is Wednesday, September 13th, 2023. Welcome, everybody, to your viral corner of the internet. As you know, tonight I have a special guest for you. She's in Irvine, California. Please welcome Desireé Townsend. Hello, Desireé.
Townsend, but close.
Townsend, sorry.
That's okay. We were worried about, because I'm actually in Aliso Viejo, so we were worried about saying Aliso Viejo wrong. Instead, we got the last
Said
name
I got your
wrong.
name
That's
wrong.
okay.
I'm sorry. Desireé
That's
Townsend.
okay.
Townsend.
Yeah, that's fine.
It's like it's not like it's the first time I've ever seen you. I don't know why I can't. It's not just you. I don't remember other people's names too. But I do remember virus names, okay? So there you go.
That's
Anyway.
actually the most important thing to know. So that's completely fine by me.
So welcome
hi,
to Office Hours. And
Thank you.
before we get started, I thought it would be interesting to bring Desiree on to talk a little bit about her experience and what she's learned and what she plans to do. But also she went to a antimicrobial resistance conference recently. She wants to tell us some things about that. But before we start, let's see who is here. So we have our intrepid moderators here tonight, who I would love to thank at the start. Vanity, good to see you. Andrew, so Vanity's local. Andrew's in New Zealand. That's cool. And Les is in California. And Tom is, I don't know where you are. Oh, Western Oregon tonight. Very good, Tom. Good to see you. And I think that does it for moderators tonight. So thanks to you all for coming. Good to see you. And let's see, what do we have in terms of people tonight? Where are we from? Oh, here's Alina from Coxsackie, New York. The home of Coxsackie viruses, of course. Patricia's from Boston. Who else do we have here who's identified themselves? Mark. Hey, Mark is cooking dinner. But Mark, I know, is in Puget Sound, Washington. Jessica is from Toledo. Kang is from Chicago. 17C, getting chilly out there, huh? Wow. Let's see. Noir. Peter is from Boulder, Colorado. Noir is from Santa Fe. John is in Minnesota. Doreen is in Central Connecticut. Oh, look at this from Az from Saudi Arabia.
Oh, wow.
I've seen before. Nice to have you here. This is pretty funny. We are all nice, Desiree, but not half as clever as Vincent. I don't think so. I'm not so clever. Lori's from Tomball, Texas. Rima, hello, Rima from Iowa. Carol is from Southern California, so maybe
I got someone from California. Great.
So Carol is our resident nephrologist. So we ever have kidney questions, we can ask Carol about them.
Oh, fascinating.
Louisville, Kentucky. Central is that like Iowa? I don't know. Central Illinois. There you go. Tacoma. All right. Sorry, Mark. Tacoma, Washington. West Virginia. Minnesota. UK. England. I love this. Don't you? Doesn't it great to see where people are from? Claire is from the UK. Cherry is from the Lake District in the UK. Simon is from San Jose. Oh, look, Mark. Rima loves your episodes. So there you go. You're building up fans, Mark. Mark has a new podcast on the Microbe TV network called Microbial Minute or Minute Microbial. I don't remember my own shows. Who knows? But it's doing very well. Coralie is Canberra, Australia. Cool. Coralie, I'm going to be in Australia twice next year. 2 separate trips, Coralie. So maybe one of those we can check it out. We can hook up. Roland is from Taos. Wow, Taos, New Mexico. That's cool. Orange County, LA,
Oh, wonderful.
Miami, Florida, Santa Barbara, beautiful place. Vincent is worldwide. I don't know, Mark, but
Vincent is worldwide.
Seacoast, New Hampshire. That's interesting. And Matters Microbial. Thank you, Mark. Matters Microbial is Mark's new podcast. It hasn't yet reached 10 episodes. You know, the critical number of episodes for a podcast is 12. Most fail before 12 episodes. But I know
was
Mark.
not aware of that.
Mark is not going to fail. He's going to keep going.
We believe in you, Mark.
He's going to hit 1,000 episodes. Level 6 Productions is in Ashland, Oregon. All right. So that's our crew tonight. We have 100 people so far. Probably will increase. You know, as the West Coasters get out of work, Desiree, they start to watch.
Yeah.
Once
well, I'm here at work too, so.
So are you where you actually work?
So I'm actually contracting with a couple of my attorney friends. One is an intellectual property attorney, and the other one is an employment litigation attorney. And it's actually been kind of interesting because I've mainly worked in intellectual property, and the clients in intellectual property are, they're happy because they're getting a patent or trademark or copyright. They just want to give you a hug, right? But with litigation, the clients are angry. They're up to their eyeballs in legal fees, and they literally just want to punch you in the face. So the client base is very different. But it's cool to get the experience in litigation, because I've been working literally all day. So I'm glad I'm doing this podcast, because I need a break from California Civil Code for a minute.
All right, we'll give you a break.
So give me some good questions, guys, because I need to not think about that anymore.
Cue up your questions for Desiree. So here, Simon says, I enjoyed both your and Debunk the Funks episodes with Desiree, so great to see her live talking with us all. We have a good crowd here,
Simon.
Desiree. And there was someone else here from, where was it? Salinas, California. There you go.
Wonderful.
And in Europe, we keel over at 2 a.m. So right now it's 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 1. Yeah, it's 2 a.m. now. So people who are in Europe, I really appreciate your coming.
Yeah, thank you for joining.
So there is a question. Actually, before we get to the questions, Desiree, just for people who might not have heard the pods, just give a summary of your 2009 experience that brings you here today.
Yes. So in 2009, I came into fame after I received an influenza vaccine that ends up being completely unrelated to an autoimmune disease that got triggered around the timing. So when the anti-vaxxers of Generation Rescue heard my story in the media, they came to me and honestly brainwashed me, because I have 40 hours of documentary film footage of this, and you can see them brainwashing and indoctrinating me, even though I was pro-vaccine before. I got flu vaccines every single year prior to that. And so basically they took my story, they used it to further the anti-vax propaganda. And unfortunately, it came at a dangerous time, because back in 2009, you may remember, was the H1N1 swine flu pandemic. And so ironically, here I am again being propelled into fame in 2023 after the death of Dr. Buttar, who is a prominent anti-vaxxer. And again, another pandemic, this time the highly pathogenic avian flu is circulating the globe now. So I'm really trying to step forward and use this platform, this fame I've been thrown into, to combat vaccine hesitancy and vaccine disinformation, so that we can better prepare for the next pandemic.
All right. So we do have a question here from Kang. Desiree, when did you realize the anti-vaxxers were fraudulent? Was it a series of events or a single event that changed your mind?
I think it was when I was actually when I was actually physically part of the movement with them, when they had brought me into Dr. Buttar's office and I started hearing what they were talking about, how they were going to fill the entire office with new patients at $30,000 a pop. And um, also, just looking at Dr. Buttar's office, it was a multi-million-dollar office with extremely expensive, not only equipment, but frivolous things in it, like a marble statues of dolphins and almost religious texts on on marble hanging on the wall. And when you see that, you realize the dichotomy between what they're saying and how they're actually their actions. And so that's what really opened my eyes to everything. But once, even knowing that, I still had to go get a degree in biochemistry and molecular biology to get that brainwashing out of my head, to see the science and say, oh, everything they told me were lies. That's not actually how things work.
Steph, I want to welcome Steph, our moderator tonight. Thanks for coming, Steph, from San Francisco area. You can tell from her name, Steph SF.
Hi, Steph.
Okay, now Simon says, it seems to me that there's a lot of similarity to how anti-vaxxers groom and brainwash and how other forms of grooming and indoctrination are done.
It's a lot like a cult. It really is. So we need to make a distinction, and this is a very important thing, and this is why we've been talking about the cancel culture. We need to hold the figureheads like Jenny McCarthy and RFK. We need to hold them accountable. They need to be the ones that are subjected to cancellation. But with this indoctrination and brainwashing in mind, we have to keep that in the back of our heads when we deal with the people who are not the figureheads, because it's almost as if they have been pulled into a cult. So imagine for a moment you have somebody that you love that got pulled into a cult, a son, a daughter, your mother or father. You wouldn't attack them and belittle them and walk the other way and turn the other cheek. You would always be silently there, hoping and praying for the moment that they come back to you and ask, hey, what do you think about this thing I'm involved with? So that's the approach I think we need to take with our fellow friends and family members who may have fallen victim to the anti-vaccine cult. We need to be there as a silent support system, so that when they come out, when they maybe get slightly curious, we're there to answer their questions, to embrace them, to bring them back into rational thought in society. But very importantly, we do need to cancel the people at the very top. So what I mean by, so if you're famous, if you're a celebrity, and this is something I've begun to realize even just with my little bit of fame that I have, is that you are a role model. Whether or not you agree with that, it doesn't matter. You're a role model. You can either be a good role model or you can be a bad role model. And Jenny McCarthy is a bad role model. So Vincent has a video of her from April of this year where she's praising Del Bigtree, and she's calling the warriors who are trying to kneecap the public health system by getting rid of vaccine mandates. She's calling them warriors and brave fighters. At the same time, we had 60 million birds, migratory birds, die from a highly pathogenic avian flu. And that's the time when she decides to kneecap our public health system. That's what I mean. That is what is so infuriating to me, is there is another pandemic that is just around the corner. There's always going to be something like that, especially with 8 billion people on this planet. And we cannot allow people like Jenny McCarthy to destabilize our public health system when we face a pandemic of disastrous proportions. So I implore anybody who's on this to watch the video. We can't show it to you because we don't have the license or the permission to actually show it, but please go watch. It's a 2-minute video of Jenny McCarthy. And after you see this, please right to Fox, right to the Masked Singer, right to Kim Kardashian, pro-vaccine Kim Kardashian Skims, who did a campaign with her in July, and say, why are you giving a platform to somebody who's trying to destroy our only ability to prepare for a pandemic? So that's what I'm asking viewers to do, is let's try to hold the figureheads accountable while having patience and empathy for those that are trapped in this cult.
All right, I just pasted a link to the video in the chat so you can check it out. What is Skims campaign? Is that some kind of product?
Kim Kardashian launched. Have you heard of Spanx? Of course you haven't. So, so it lifts and tightens, right, in all the right areas.
Oh,
So
okay.
Kim Kardashian launched this clothing line that lifts and tightens in all the right
Okay.
areas.
Got it.
And she hired Jenny McCarthy in July to do a Skims campaign. And from what I know, Kim Kardashian is pro-vaccine. So it was very disappointing to see her give this platform to somebody who's trying to kneecap our public health system.
Yeah, so Jenny is all about defeating the mandates, right, that we have talked about on
Mm-hmm.
Beyond the Noise quite a bit. Today I recorded one with Paul Offit where he talked about um, where he talked about Mississippi reversing its stance and allowing for religious exemptions to vaccines now, and so it's really
It's
problematic.
unfortunate because when you, and I think what they're doing, and I don't want to get into any political discussions, but I think what the anti-vaccine industry is doing is they see what the anti-abortion movement has done. Right, you slowly chip away at the foundation of the system until you can completely collapse it. And I believe that's what they're doing with the vaccine mandates. But I think that's incredibly dangerous because, look, if you're going to be part of civilization, if you're going to live in the United States of America, you have to abide by certain rules. You don't go running red lights. If you want to use the public school system, your kids need to be vaccinated. If you don't want to do that, fine, then go live off the grid. But if you want to live in civilization here in the United States, you are responsible. You have a civic duty to abide by these rules.
Yeah. Well, it's the problem is that, as Paul said today, United States has a unique situation. We think we're not, we don't have to do anything for anyone, right? We don't have to do anything for our neighbors. I mean, that's all about the Revolutionary War. We split off from Europe. And so in Europe, you don't need mandates for vaccines, and they do very well. But here, Americans think they should have their own decision making. So it's a real problem.
So before we went live, Vincent and I were talking about this amazing book. This should become your Bible, people. The Great Influenza by John M. Barry, and this is a very important book to read. In that there's a little bit of science in there that may be slightly off, but the more important piece of this book is that it shows the social dynamics that happened in 1918 that really led to the explosion of the virus. And some cities did better and some did worse. But the cities that did better, they did not take that approach. They helped their neighbors. They set up community action groups to go out and help people that were too sick to even feed themselves, because this great influenza, and that's what scares me right now, is that the current strain of this highly pathogenic avian influenza looks very, very similar to what happened in 1918. It is not following the normal rules of an avian influenza. It is not, it is mutating in ways that have never been seen before. It is jumping into mammals in ways that has never been seen before. It's now in migratory birds all around the entire world. So to illustrate this point, COVID-19 emerged in one city in one country, but this highly pathogenic avian flu It's all around the entire world. The number of possibilities for it to reassort and for it to um, mutate and emerge is essentially infinite at this point. So I know it's not I don't believe it's an immediate threat, but I believe it's a threat that we're going to need to deal with in the next maybe 2 years or so. So it's really important that we start preparing now for this potentiality, that we start forming community action groups at the local level. And that's something that I kind of got from the World AMR Congress in Philadelphia, is that the federal governments of a lot of nations are not prepared for the next pandemic. And as you saw with COVID-19, it was disastrous, the federal response and preparedness for it. But I would argue, I don't think we really necessarily need to fully rely on the federal government, because if you look back at 1918, if you read this book, you'll see that a lot of cities and localities did really well on their own. And I think that's what we need to do for the next pandemic. We need to think local, and we need to actually prepare at the local level. And Vince, I would love to throw this on you to do, but I would love if we could potentially do live stream war games where we get a city like Los Angeles, for example, and we sit down with epidemiologists and scientists and healthcare workers and the government locally in that city, and we war game a pandemic. Okay, so here we have 100 cases of H5N1 now. What do we do? What are the next steps? And figure out from there, how do we get each locality prepared? And I think that's important because nobody wants to talk about the next pandemic. They don't want to even talk about COVID. And I think a lot of that is because people are scared and they know they have no control over the situation. But if you give people the ability to get ready and control the situation by being pandemic ready, they're going to be more responsive and more willing to get ready, to prepare. Because when you think of it from a federal government standpoint, none of us can really have any impact at that level, but we can at the local level. And I think that's kind of where we need to focus our attention for the next pandemic.
So Andrew says, I'm told that the best way to change someone's worldview is to approach them through shared values, because facts just bounce off of the Kevlar of misinformation. It's true.
Well, here's something to think about. So when we speak about facts, people use data to think, but emotions to react. So I would argue that we need to go after people's emotions, appeal for their emotions to get them out of misinformation. And so part of the reason I went to the AMR Congress last week was to get in touch with Pfizer. I had costed poor Jane True, she's a vice president at Pfizer, under the pretense that, hey, like, look, I had my Pfizer COVID vaccines in March. I would love to get the booster live stream so people see that it's safe, that it's okay to get. And I would still plan on doing that. But the main reason I was trying to get in touch with Pfizer is because I've prepared a 15-page slide deck on how they can improve their advertising using emotional. I know, don't laugh. I'm crazy about that. But this is important, Vincent. If we can counteract the vaccine disinformation and hesitancy by putting together a better marketing strategy, which unfortunately falls on the pharmaceutical companies because we do not have a robust US government PR machine or public relations to deal with that. So it really falls on the pharmaceutical companies. And unfortunately, Pfizer is literally boring people to death with their advertisements because their advertisements are so boring that people are not getting vaccinated. And it's even worse than that. There's a Reddit subforum that talks about horrible commercials. There was a guy on there who said, if I see one more Pfizer PSA, I will never get a Pfizer vaccine. And this guy started getting Moderna vaccines because of how bad the commercials are. So that's got to tell you, your commercials are so bad that one, people are not getting vaccinated, and the pro vaccine people are running to your competitors. So you've got to try something different. And I put together, and we'll show some of those slides tonight. There's a program I'd like for a program I'd like to launch that I think could help with vaccine disinformation and hesitancy. But we'll go over those slides. But if anyone on this stream works at Pfizer or knows somebody that works at Pfizer, and you have have them contact me. My email is Desireé Townsend at protonmail.com. If you email me with your Pfizer email from your Pfizer email account, I will send you the slide deck. And please get it to your marketing team, get it to your CEO, make a ruckus within your company, because it is so important that we change the face of pharmaceutical companies and we change the face of vaccines, because that's going to go a long way to getting us pandemic ready by combating vaccine disinformation and hesitancy.
Here's one from Doreen. Desiree, thank you for being here and being part of the solution. Any advice how to relate to those between the figureheads and the lied to? For example, a friend or a loved one actually in the medical field.
Again, I think you have to treat it as if you have a loved one in a cult. And you just need, I know their social media posts are annoying and they're crazy, but what I would try to reply with is, instead of attacking them, use humor, because humor is a great way of cutting through misinformation.
Sure.
And back to the slide deck I put together for Pfizer, there was a really funny commercial done a few years back for avocados, in which they pretended to be part of a secret society of Illuminatis, and they're calling out all this Illuminati conspiracy stuff. And you just start laughing at it. And when you start laughing, you're like, oh my God, like it is ridiculous. And then you start thinking, okay, this conspiracy theory is ridiculous. So what I would please ask you to do is, I know that your friend or your family member is deep within this cult. Just be there. Just use humor. If you see a post that you don't like, use humor instead of attacking. We don't want to sink to their level, right? We don't want to use negative emotions to attack them, because they're just going to come attack us back. Instead, we want to kill them with kindness. We want to use empathy and kindness and patience and warmth and love, because then they'll see, hey, these pro-vaccine people, they're not bad people. They're kind people. They want us to attack back. We can't do that. We have to be better than that. So I would please, Doreen, please try to offer kind of advice, and if your friend ever has any questions, just be there for them, but don't shut them out. Please don't do that, because if you shut out people like this, people that are stuck in the cult, they're going to dig in deeper, and then it's going to be really hard to get them out of it.
All right, here's a tough one from New York Cohan. Do you think there should be flu and COVID vaccine requirements for public education? So this is exactly what the anti-vaxxers would like to reverse, right? Reverse the mandates for needing vaccinations to go to school. And there are a whole bunch of them, right? There's MMR, there's polio, and many others. So many countries do not have mandates for education, vaccine mandates for education. I was just talking with Marion Koopmans last week on TWIV, right?
Yes, I saw that episode.
And she said, no, we don't have, but here we have over 95% compliance. So, you give the parents a choice and they make the right choice. And Paul Offit today said, the U.S. is not going to do that. We're not going to make the right choice. Enough parents will choose not to immunize their kids that will have outbreaks. We'll have polio outbreaks. We'll have measles outbreaks and so forth. So I think, so for flu, no, I don't think you need flu mandates for school. COVID, no, not anymore. The pandemic is over. You don't need a mandate for school. But I think the other vaccines that we mandate, we need to keep that in place. I mean, part of the problem is the COVID mandates that we went through for the past 3 years really rubbed people the wrong way. They weren't in place in a lot of other countries. But again, if they hadn't put them in place, I'm afraid that we would have a worse outcome here. So, um,
Well, and again, I think a lot of that is due to the branding and the branding and advertisements, unfortunately, of the vaccines. And I think by fixing that, you wouldn't necessarily have so much pushback on the. You may not need a mandate because you may be able to counteract vaccine hesitancy by having a better branding. And that was my big frustration with people who were talking about the COVID-19 vaccines and the mRNA technology, because I was working in biotech in Seattle up until the end of June, and this is what was frustrating with people. They're like, "Oh, the mRNA technology, it's dangerous." I'm like, you have no idea. This is like the Louis Vuitton of tech, right? And I felt it is. It's like this is really high tech stuff, and to use it in a vaccine to me was like taking a Ferrari to go half a mile to the grocery store when all you needed was like just a basic vaccine. But that was the part that frustrates me about people in the mRNA technology. I'm like, do you have any idea how high tech this stuff is? It is so high tech that developing nations can't even afford to manufacture this. They have to just take our vaccine scraps because it is so high tech. And here's the other thing that really pisses me off about people talking garbage about the mRNA technology is that I guarantee if your son or daughter were born without a protein, were born without a gene and couldn't make a protein to see or to walk, you would be the first person signed up to get that mRNA technology. So I don't want to hear that anymore because Americans were literally given the Gucci of biotech and they're not even happy with that.
no, yeah, that's because they're fed the wrong information. Now, Rima has a good point here. We talked about this today on Beyond the Noise with Paul. I feel like during the pandemic, too many people became religious, running behind religious exemption, knowing that, honest to God, no religion is against it. And in fact, I asked Paul, I said, where is it written in any religious document that you can't have vaccines? And he said, no, these are mainly anti-vaxxers that are using that as a way to get around it. He said there's only one religion which, after the smallpox vaccine came out long ago, they wrote in their document you shouldn't get the smallpox vaccine, but no other religion actually has it written down. Now, it may be that a religious leader says to their congregation, don't get this vaccine. That happens with rabbis. That happens with pastors in many communities. And, all of a sudden they become scientists and they don't know what they're talking about. But hiding behind religion, I mean, Paul said it today. Religion is about taking care of people and treating people well. And no religion wants you to get sick and die.
And caring for your fellow man.
Exactly,
right?
Exactly. Yes.
Getting the vaccine so you can care for other people. No, it's a loophole. Again, like I said, the anti-vaxxers are trying to slowly chip away at everything they can because they've seen what works with the anti-abortion movement is you just keep chipping away at things one by one until it falls, and that's what they're doing here. They're chipping away at the mandates, and they're trying to get religious exemptions for things. But again, I really think a lot of this could be combated by actually changing the public's perception of vaccines. And in order to do that, you have to change the public's perceptions of pharmaceutical companies. So in that slide deck I prepared, pharmaceutical companies are actually their public perception is lower than even the government. That's a really low bar, right? To where
for sure.
to where the U.S. government is seen in a better light than pharmaceutical companies. So that has to be fixed. But I promise you, if if the pharmaceutical companies can tackle their image, and we can make vaccines be cool and fun and sexy, I think that'll go a long ways in stopping a lot of this.
All right, Simon says, how can we better message the public health needs when we have a pandemic with a novel virus for which we're all not immune versus the regular public health needs ongoing for general vaccination? Yeah, that's a challenge. You have two different things there. So you have the normal everyday stuff versus an emergency.
I think we start with the flu vaccine. I think that's where we need to start. We start with that. And maybe we can talk about that now. So they call me the flu shot cheerleader because that's all people remember from 2009. So I came up with an idea, and we'll go into those slides now, if that's okay with you, Vincent.
Yeah,
I came up with an idea to go and create a team of flu shot cheerleaders. So I think if you can make one of the vaccines look fun and cool and safe, then you can go a long ways on using that to further other vaccines, right? So this is part of the slide deck I created for Pfizer.
or anyone who will look at it, right?
Exactly. Anyone in the pharmaceutical companies who will look at it. And turning vaccine prickles into tickles, right? So we're going to use like whimsical marketing methods and advertising to try to counter vaccine disinformation and hesitancy. So if you can go to the next slide, Vincent, one more back.
There you go.
So we would be introducing flu shot cheerleaders, and this would be to tackle vaccine hesitancy and disinformation by creating this really cool squad of hot, smart, young women who would go to football games during flu season, because that's when NFL games actually happen, is during flu season, and they would talk to fans and encourage them to get a vaccine, ideally on site. So what I'd love to see happen is actually have vaccine clinics on site at the NFL games. So you get these hot cheerleaders, they're talking to fans, they bring them in to get vaccinated. And what's really cool about this is that a lot of young men under the age of 45 attendees, and they're typically the ones that are the vaccine holdouts, right? So it's a great place to start working on the public image of vaccines and showing people that they're not scary. There's a whole squad of hot, cool cheerleaders who get the vaccines. So if you can go to the next slide, what I came up with was actually back one more. There we go. Yes, is launching a pilot program here in the Los Angeles area, because what's cool about LA is they have two football teams here at SoFi Stadium. They have the Chargers and the Rams. So by launching a pilot program here, you get a robust amount of games that the cheerleaders can test and see how it works. And then you have the pro-vaccine Los Angeles government. I don't know if you need their approval to have a vaccine clinic on site, but it would just be good to have government support, local government support. And then what's even cooler is that it's in LA, right? So you have a huge number of already super attractive women to where you can pull from to be part of the cheerleader squad. And, we can do the program online to where we do the recruiting and find and interview the actual candidates in person in LA. So if you could go to the next slide. So this is the role of the flu shot cheerleaders. So they would have a more standardized uniform. It would be conservative. They would be just walking around the stadium, talking to fans, and then encouraging them to go to the on-site flu vaccine clinic. And here's what's cool about this, right? Because how many men are gonna say to a hot cheerleader, "Oh, I'm not getting that vaccine," and the cheerleader responds, "Oh, are you afraid of a little shot? Do you want me to go with you and hold your hand?" There's very few men that are gonna be like, "Oh, okay, I guess the vaccine's not that scary," especially if a hot cheerleader is there is making fun of me, right? So it's going to go a long way to get these people into the actual vaccine clinics or get them scheduled. And then I made a mock-up here of these collectible cards that would be for each cheerleader that would be handed out at the games, and it would have a QR code. And when the fans scan the QR code, it would take them to the cheerleaders website where they can learn more about the cheerleaders, and it would take them, if they couldn't go to the vaccine clinic on site for whatever reason, it would take them to a place where they could actually schedule a vaccination in the next few days or weeks. So I think this would be really cool. And then if you can go to the next slide, the future iterations of the flu shot cheerleader squad is that you can actually make this into like a reality show where you get the public involved and they're voting on cheerleaders, and it becomes more interactive and it becomes more publicized, and people are like, oh, well, the vaccine can't be that bad if all these cool cheerleaders are doing it, so it makes it more interactive and fun, and brings the flu shot vaccine, into the public eye as something that's fun and cool. And then if you could go one more slide. And I think this will work. And the reason why I think this will work is in Orange County, there's a precedence for something similar to this. So there's this car show with a cause called Cruisin' for a Cure. So for many years, since 1999, this nonprofit has set up clinics at car shows and test men with a blood draw. So a more invasive procedure versus just getting a vaccine, a more invasive blood draw. And there are no cheerleaders going to this, by the way, but 15,000 men so far have been tested, and 6,000 have been saved from prostate cancer. So this is already shown that it can work. And I think it would be even more effective if you combine cheerleaders and football. So, and then if you go to the last slide, I really think this is important. So what I've done is because I'm an intellectual property, I filed the trademark for flu shot cheerleaders, an application for educational and entertainment services, and I've secured the domain name for flu shot cheerleaders. I'd really like this program to be owned by a nonprofit. So if there's any vaccine advocacy groups or nonprofits out there that would like to take on this project, please reach out to me. Let me know. I will assign over both the trademark application and the actual domain name to you for free. And then I'm sure I could get my friend, the intellectual property attorney, to help with the prosecution of the actual trademark when it gets to the USPTO examiners. So that's basically it. So let me know if there's any influenza or vaccine advocacy groups out there who would like to take this on. Additionally, I think this could be a great opportunity too for the vaccination or vaccine advocacy groups to work with a pharmaceutical company and have a pharmaceutical company actually sponsor the flu shot cheerleaders. So I think it could be a synergistic combination to have a nonprofit own it so that we can ensure it continues year after year, and then a pharmaceutical company sponsoring it.
Well, I just don't know if you can get these guys to miss the game to get a flu shot. That's why you have to give them a card to get one later.
You give them a hot enough cheerleader and they'll do anything.
Really? Oh, boy. Well, maybe that's one approach. But
look, I used to go to the Redskins, the Washington Commanders games, and trust me, there's a reason they put these hot, attractive girls there, is because it sells. It gets the fans interacting and acting. Yeah.
So that's for one segment, but then you have, parents who don't take their kids to get vaccinated for religious exemptions. So we need other mechanisms to do it. It's not going to be just one solution, right?
No. There's a lot more, and in the marketing deck that I put together for Pfizer, there's a lot of that in there that can help with that. And that actually brings up another interesting point that it kind of came to my attention over the past few weeks, because actually it was brought up specifically. So at the AMR Congress, I met up with Dr. Paul Offit, and I took a photo with him and I posted it on social media, and I had people reaching out to me saying, Well, I had the COVID-19 vaccine, and 6 weeks later, I have an autoimmune disease. And you know, I want to illustrate a point with that, because I hear that a lot, that this event A happened and then event B happened so many weeks after that, and that's what it looked like for me. And but it's very difficult to say that event A, the vaccine, caused event B, the autoimmune reaction, over a long period, over 4 or 5, 6 weeks, because there's a lot of other variables and exposures that could happen within that period. For example, because I've been reviewing all this documentary film footage again, I remember and realized that a few weeks after the vaccine, I got really sick with something. And in the film footage, I think it was swine flu. And the reason why I say this is because not long after I started exhibiting all these symptoms, did other people at the company I was working at, AOL, come down and were exposed to swine flu. So swine flu was going around the company like crazy. And I almost wonder if it was swine flu that kicked off my autoimmune disease. And that's why it's very important that people understand that exposure, it's hard to definitively say that it was the vaccine, right? Because there could have been so many other exposure events that happened within that time period. And let me illustrate. I want to illustrate a point, okay? So I got my Moderna vaccine in 2021. And then in 2023, when I reemerged out of my PJs and I had to go into the workforce, I got the Pfizer vaccine, the series. I got the first one on March 3rd and the second one on March 23rd. Do you want me? Let me tell you what my quote unquote vaccine reaction was to the series. So 3 weeks after I got the second Pfizer vaccine, I broke up with my ex because I realized I could do better. I lost 10 pounds. I got in the best physical shape of my entire life. I updated my entire wardrobe. I now have a closet full of Christian Louboutins. But you don't see me assigning or blaming the Pfizer vaccine for my fabulous new life, or the fact that I spent $10,000 on shoes at Nordstrom's, because that would be ridiculous, right?
Wow, that's a lot of money for shoes. Wow. I don't think I've spent that in my lifetime.
I don't have kids, so
holy cow.
That's where I put my money.
What color is your Ferrari, Desiree?
I don't have one of those.
Oh, okay. I thought you said you drove it to the grocery store. All right, here, Simon has a question. Isn't part of the problem the general American system of limited powers of central government? Yeah, I think that's part of it, because it's up to every state, and that's why we see Mississippi now allowing religious exemptions. And Desiree, back in, I forgot the year, but it was a measles outbreak at Disneyland in California, and that prompted the state to eliminate personal exemptions or religious exemptions. And so it's a reaction to an outbreak, and so maybe that's what it takes, is an outbreak to change people's minds. But yes, Simon, individual states can do what they want, just like the CDC can only recommend things. They can't. There's no enforcement.
But again, the point is, if you can't get past the forces at play with the local and the federal governments, then you have to find a workaround. And that's what I love about litigation, about working in law, is that you look at like a California civil code, right? And you're like, okay, how can I get around this? And so that's kind of the approach you have to look at with these governmental systems that are trying to handicap mandates. Is, okay, all right, we have no control over what individual states and localities and the federal government are doing. So how can we combat this? The only power we have of combating this is by actually changing the perception, the public perception of vaccine. That's all we can really do. So we have to try with that. But I want to go importantly back to the topic I was discussing about the vaccines and these supposed reactions. So outside of my, because like I said, I'm not blaming Pfizer for for me spending for the damage caused to my Nordstrom's card, because that would be ridiculous. But as humans, that's what we do. We tend to look for blame and assign meaning to things that are not really there. And I want to illustrate another example. So there was a woman who got a she had scheduled her son to get childhood vaccines, and the doctor called the day they were going to go in and get the vaccines, and he said, you know what, we can't do it today, we have to cancel. So the appointment was canceled. Not long after that, her son got really sick with something, a really bad virus, and then ended up contracting an autoimmune disease from that. And she reflected back on that day and said, oh my God, if I would have gotten the vaccines, I would have always thought that caused his reaction, when in actuality it was something completely different. Yeah. So that is a type of messaging we need to really relay to the public, is that these anecdotal stories where it's correlation, not causation, right? Where we're saying, I drop a pen and at the same time there's an earthquake. It doesn't mean every time I drop that pen there's going to be an earthquake. So we have to be more cognizant of when these events happen, that it's not necessarily the vaccine. There's so many other variables that could have contributed to this. And it's important that we kind of address that head on, because that's a big part of what the anti-vaxxers are using, is they're using timing to say this happened within this window, so it's obviously the vaccine.
Sure. Yeah, many stories like that. Paul Offit tells one as well. His wife, a pediatrician, was giving a shot to a baby, and as she was about to give the baby the shot, the baby had a seizure. Mm-hmm. So if she had given the shot before the seizure, the mother would have always thought the shot caused the seizure, right? It's hard to get around that, right? Especially if you don't know the science.
Yeah. But like my humorous illustration, we're not assigning good things that happen after the vaccine. We're not talking about all the wonderful things that happen, 3 to 6 weeks after you got your vaccine.
Yeah, sure.
But that's my point. Like, if you're going to talk about the bad things that happen, let's also talk about the good things that happen within that time period. But that's the whole point I was trying to illustrate with that story, is that there's a lot that can happen, and it's very difficult to definitively prove and assign blame to something when it's such a long time period, and there's so many other exposures that could have happened within those weeks.
So John wants to know, are most anti-vaxxers unforgivable? Is there a line that can't be crossed where a person can't be welcomed back to science-based medicine?
I don't think there's any well, other than RFK, I don't think there's any line where you cannot come back. Even Jenny McCarthy. I truly think that Jenny McCarthy identifies with this movement. I believe that somewhere down the line, she either was her beliefs were diminished, or somehow not taken seriously by the establishment, by doctors. And I almost feel like she might have a vendetta, and that is why she's so anti-vax. I don't think she means to cause harm to people, but what she doesn't realize is she is a public figure. She is a role model, and she needs to be a good role model, because when you're telling people not to get vaccines, you are potentially risking the lives of thousands, if not millions, of people with that messaging. And when you tell people not to get vaccines, you're maybe only, then this is a really, really far stretch, you're maybe only really quote unquote saving maybe one or two people from any sort of vaccine reaction. So if you look at it that way, there's so much more damage that she's doing by being anti-vax than if she just were to be quiet. And that's kind of the thing I would like to impart on celebrities who find themselves being in the anti-vax mentality, is just shut up, don't talk about it, because you're potentially risking people's lives. A lot of people did not get vaccines and now they're struggling with long COVID. And who does that affect? That largely affects people of lower and middle classes who don't have the money to afford health care, don't have the ability to not work. And so now the Jenny McCarthy's of the world just told these people not to get vaccines. They have long COVID. They can't work. They can't afford to take care of their families or get health care. So it's extremely damaging. And unfortunately, it's extremely damaging to people who can least afford to take care of themselves.
So do you think that if you sat down with Jenny, you could convince her not to do all this?
I would love to. I would love to have a conversation with her and find out what really is going on in her head, because what's interesting is that she doesn't publicly talk about her anti-vax stance, but then she shows up on this random rally in a video that's really hard to find and hidden, just praising Del Bigtree. So I don't understand why she's doing that, but it's very odd. It's very odd, unless it's just her public relations team saying, yeah, you can be anti-vax, but we need to keep it in the shadows, girl. So I don't know.
Okay. All right. Andrew says, the father of Maurice Wilkins, Nobel Prize winner, was Pongaroa's first doctor and an anti-vaxxer. Why? Because he did not like the animal testing required back in the early part of the last century. Well, that's an interesting stance, right? I don't think today's anti-vaxxers are for the same reason.
No, not at all.
For different reasons. Pete says, 2 rock musicians I know, the core of a band since the early 80s, fell out over the vaccine, split the band after so many decades. Pretty daft. Yeah, people, best friends will split over disagreements like that, yeah?
Well, here's the problem. Here's the problem with vaccines. It's now, and I think it's largely because of Fox News, they've decided to use it as a political weapon, right? They've decided to take the vaccine stance and use it as a political tool to even further divide and separate the country. So it's incredibly disheartening to see, because once you start putting it into Republican versus Democrat, it's really, really hard to suss that out. And people become even further entrenched with it, because so many people, their identities are, I'm a Republican or I'm a Democrat, and I follow all of the things within that. And so great, now you put anti-vax with Republican, and now you've got an entire half of the nation that doesn't believe in it. It's extremely dangerous. I wish Fox News would stop doing that. It's incredibly disheartening. And again, like I said, there is going to be another pandemic, and COVID-19 was child's play compared to what an avian flu will do. And it really was. I mean,
we don't know, Desiree, we don't know. We can't predict, right? Scientists don't predict.
We don't need to predict. I mean,
no.
What it's
Listen,
doing to
I just talked to Ron Fouché, and he's not worried about avian flu, so he's the expert. He's worried about the mammals.
Worried about it
because it's, even though there's this increased activity worldwide in birds, right, never seen before, even though there's increased activity in non-human mammals, there's no increased activity in humans. And there's no more infections than before. Yeah, so he says he's more worried about the sea lions and the dolphins and the bears that get infected than humans.
And how is that not worrisome? It's jumped into links now.
Yeah, I mean, well, that's one world.
It's adapting quickly.
Right?
It's adapting quickly into mammals.
One world health. We have to worry about everything. I totally agree with that. Yeah.
But I think the importance of this avian influenza is that we need to be focusing more on pandemic readiness. And I think if we really
totally agree. Yes.
If we put the vaccinations in that category as being pandemic ready, then I think it makes more people willing to want to get on board with
Yeah.
it, because
Sure.
it's not so much then about vaccines, it's about being ready for the next pandemic. And to illustrate the seriousness of an avian flu, if you look at the case fatalities of COVID-19, it was what, before vaccines, it was like 3%, 4%, right? The
Mm-hmm.
case fatality of an avian flu that jumps into humans is anywhere from 50% to 60%. And that's without comorbidities. So you take the comorbidities that you have in our population, you could be looking at anywhere from 60 to 90% lethality if infected with an avian influenza. And I
But
know, I get it.
you
It's,
don't
you
know if it's
can't,
going to be
you
that.
can't, you don't. But you should be
I
prepared for the
agree.
worst
I'm not
case
disagreeing with that.
scenario.
I totally agree. And that's why people are working on H5 mRNA vaccines as we speak. And the good thing is we can do them quickly. And the other thing is we do have antivirals that
Yes,
work. So they can be used where we didn't have anything for SARS-CoV-2. So we're in a better position. And I totally agree.
I
We should
agree.
be worried and not say, nah, nothing's going to happen. And people are working on it. Believe me, there's a lot of
Because
activity.
it would be fantastic if, if we're not worried about it now, to just start quietly and,
Sure.
slowly
I
preparing
agree.
for it, right?
Totally agree. How about
Versus
having
a,
how
yeah,
about having enough face masks ready? That would help too, right?
face masks and respirators. And that was a really interesting, or it was a really hopeful ray of sunshine at the AMR conference, because it was very depressing at the federal government level to see the lack of preparedness. But there were a lot of biotech companies at AMR that are trying to tackle this. So I went to the expo and met with three companies. One of them was working on the antiviral side. They have an alpha-1 antitrypsin, a serine protease inhibitor that they're looking to deliver through a nebulizer, as an antiviral for the next pandemic. And that can be kind of helpful now, because you've got a lot of poultry that are being impacted with this avian flu. So if you could, somehow spray the poultry farms with this antiviral, you could perhaps stop that from, or preemptively, or stop an infection if you find out one of the flock is infected with avian flu. That was AA Tech, I believe. And then there was another company. Actually, they're here locally, GSD Bio. They're a nonprofit, and like I said about the mRNA technology. The mRNA technology, again, it's like a Louis Vuitton of tech. It's very expensive. Very few developing nations can afford to do it. So there's nonprofits like GSD Bio. They're working on a bacteriophage to actually be able to produce the protein of interest, so that
Mm-hmm.
you can potentially deliver it mucosally, and then to be able to produce it in mass quantities if you can't afford the mRNA technology. And then another company, Maxwell Biosciences, they are actually working on an antimicrobial, universal antimicrobial, to disrupt the bacterial cell wall and membrane. So there are companies out there getting pandemic ready, which is so helpful to hear. But now we need to be doing that. We need to be doing that by combating vaccine misinformation and vaccine hesitancy. And then, like I said, again, it would be great if we could do this at the local level and start getting pandemic ready there as well. But I know, Vincent, you and many other people do not think this is serious yet. But I feel like Jennifer Lawrence in that movie Don't Look Up. There's literally a comet hurtling towards Earth, and all anybody wants to talk about is the Taylor Swift concert
Yeah,
movie.
I agree with that. I'm
Um,
not saying. I just don't want you to say it's going to happen. That's all, because we
No,
don't know.
no,
That's all.
we don't. We can never predict anything with
Okay.
certainty. But I just want people to keep that in the back of their head and start thinking about, okay, how could we prepare for that now, when we have all the time in the world to start thinking and doing
Yeah.
that.
So I'm putting a link in the show notes. I wrote a column in 2020, April 2020. The
Hmm.
SARS-CoV-2 pandemic could have been prevented, okay? Because we could have had antivirals, because we knew SARS-1 was already a problem, but we decided not to make any antivirals because no company
Yep.
is interested because they can't make money. The NIH wasn't interested because they thought it wasn't an issue. And if we had antivirals, we could have stopped it in China, most likely. So everybody on Earth should be outraged at that, but that was one
But
that we shouldn't have.
that's the point. We know what this virus is right now. We know the strain of this H5N1, so we can
Sure.
preemptively start working on it
We
now. I
are.
mean, we
We're
can't.
making vaccines. We have antivirals. They're
Exactly.
making more. I don't disagree with that. I just don't want you to say it's going to kill 80% of the people because we don't know.
No,
Because,
I'm not saying that. I'm just trying to get people to understand what happened in 1918. It's looking very similar now. And we can't let our guard down. We can't say, oh, the pandemic's over. Hooray. There's 8 billion people on this
yeah,
planet. It's,
but just be
we
careful,
have to,
though. If
yeah,
you scare people, they may not believe you. So you have to walk a fine line of saying this
that's
could
true.
be an issue, but don't say half the world is going to die because then they'll say, "Oh, you're exaggerating. I'm not going to listen to you at all." Okay, so just somewhere in between. Let's be ready.
That's fair. That's fair. But that's why I think it would be really cool if we did war games and live stream war games and, started these discussions and conversations about how we could get prepared at the local level.
So Wandering World says, to be honest, in the UK, we don't need mandates. It just needs a quick explanation from a nurse as to what is safer for the child, and the vast majority get vaccinated. I know a lot of countries don't have mandates, and it works. But Wandering
I
World,
agree.
the
I agree.
U.S. the U.S. split off from you guys because we wanted to be cowboys. That's it.
We wanted our independence. No, and again, I agree. And I think that's why we may not need mandates if we can better market and advertise and change a public perception of vaccines, that we might not need to do that anymore. And so I think that's why it's really important that we get companies like Pfizer and Moderna to change, if they can, the public perception of not only them but their vaccines, because that's going to go a long way to maybe not needing the mandates anymore.
Yes, for sure. Let's see. What did I here? Andy, I wanted to put this up. I'm grateful my mother made sure I got all my childhood vaccines. That was many years ago. Same with me. Got them all.
Yep.
Thanks, Mom. That's really good.
But a lot of that was because of the childhood mandates. Because if you didn't have that, your kids couldn't go to school. And so my parents are very lazy, right? So if it weren't for the school writing a letter saying you got to get your kids vaccinated or they're not going to school, my parents would not have brought us in. So I do think there needs to be a mandate at the school level, just because you do have a lot of parents, they're busy, or it might be an afterthought. But if their kids are unable to get into school, they'll quickly remember and then go get the vaccines.
So we should clarify. These mandates say you need to be vaccinated to go to school. If you don't get vaccinated, you're not going to go to school. So the alternative is to homeschool, and many people do that. Right? You're not
Yeah.
going to go to jail if you don't get vaccinated. You just cannot go to school. Right?
Yeah, and so that's true. There's different mandates. There's mandates for school, or there's mandates like we did with COVID. So specifically for the childhood vaccines, I think you should have a certain level of mandate to attend school. But that's just my opinion. I think you're going to need that, because there are a lot of parents that may not necessarily be anti-vax, but it might not be the first thing they think about. Like, oh, I need to go get my child vaccinated. Well, you do if you want them to attend school. It's kind of like that built-in reminder that, hey, you need to get your kids vaccinated. And if you don't, they can't attend school. So I think having the mandates at the school level is kind of important.
Here you go. Charlotte says, we are so lucky in this country to have all these vaccines. We are. That's the way to look at it.
We are. And that's, again, what I said. It's like, this mRNA vaccine technology, again, the Louis Vuitton of tech, and people in this country don't even appreciate what they're being given.
For sure. So someone wants to know how many pairs of shoes you can get for $10,000. Can you get
only a few, actually. I feel like I should report my the vaccine reaction and the damage caused to my Nordstrom cards in a VAERS report, because it was substantial.
The mandates created a division where people had to choose a side, and to change sides mean admitting they were wrong. The media switch from protected to it helps reduce was a big error.
I agree.
Well, the COVID vaccine messaging was wrong. The press got it all wrong because they thought it would prevent infection, and it never was meant to prevent infection. And then so the original vaccine trials were to prevent disease, to prevent COVID. And then when they started measuring infection and they saw that infection was happening, the press said it was a failure, and people got confused. So yes, this was terrible messaging, and that's in part why the people who came here on every week got the right story and learned that they were never meant to prevent infection. So yes, I agree with the messaging totally there.
And that's an important point. So as we start, thinking about the next pandemic and being prepared, we need to think about this messaging, because the messaging was so poor and it was all over the place that we almost need to have one centralized either a government agency or an advocacy group where all of the messaging comes out of, so that it's not discombobulated and it's not countering something someone else said, because that's why people lost trust, because there wasn't one consistent message. It was all over the place, and different agencies were saying different things. And that's something that I think we really need to focus on. And it's a shame that the federal government doesn't have like an agency that can take over that messaging and make it more appropriate. So I think that's something we should try to figure out how to improve, or how to establish one source that really puts out that information.
Doreen says, I hear you folks about side effects from vaccines. I think Dr. V and Dr. Daniel said it's luck of the draw, but when I get even a bad one, I'm joyful because I know it's going to vanish in a day or so. So we don't want to minimize any side effects that happen.
Definitely
there can
not.
be, but they don't cause autism, for example. They don't cause all the many other things that people think they do. And, and so we try and explain that, and then people tell us, well, you can't use facts to explain this, and so we're kind of lost.
Well, you have to use emotions again, and that's why I think it's important that people understand that yes, there are vaccine reactions. They're rare, but the reactions to COVID, the long COVID people got, is horrible. It's debilitating. And that's not brought up very often. The people that didn't get vaccines often got long COVID, and they're still to this day suffering from that. I would rather have had a minimal vaccine reaction, even for a few weeks, versus long COVID.
So Andy here, this is interesting. I'm only disagreeing about her calling these people anti-vaxxers. I won't get an mRNA vaccine, but I get all the others. I know many who feel the same way. I'm not in a cult. So you have the right to say, I don't want an mRNA vaccine, as opposed to saying, I don't want any vaccine because they're all bad, right?
Well, I'd like to ask Andy, why are you against the mRNA vaccine? I'm just curious.
Okay, Andy could put it in there. And a number of people have said they don't want to get it. Okay, so we have an alternative. We have a protein-based Novavax vaccine. And would that be better for you? That's fine. And it's always good to have a choice. Now, Dominic,
I personally like the mRNA vaccine. I
never saw an mRNA I didn't like, Desiree.
Yes. Me
mRNA is
too.
great. We all have mRNA in us. We all have so much mRNA in us. What's the problem of sticking a little bit more in? I don't get that. I've worked with mRNA my whole life. It's fine.
And like I said, I like Christian Louis Vuitton, so of course I'm going to get the Louis Vuitton of
but
of Biotech.
if there's a choice, and someone doesn't want to get mRNA and there's a protein-based vaccine, that's fine. The only situation you'd be stuck is if there's only mRNA vaccines and you need one to go to work, for example. Then you'd be stuck, right? Then you have to make a tough decision.
Yeah, but I'm of the I just having worked in biotech and I understand how the mRNA technology works. I will only ever get an mRNA vaccine, so that's why I was excited to hear that Pfizer's doing the mRNA flu shot, because I'm definitely getting that. I really like the mRNA technology, but it would be interesting to hear from Andy what his perception of that vaccine was, because I'm just curious, like, what is the main fear with the mRNA vaccine?
I've seen a few other individuals on this stream who say they feel it's a new technology and they want to wait a few years to see if there are any long-term rare effects, right? And I couldn't argue with that because it is new. But, from my perspective, having worked with mRNA my whole career and knowing what it can do and can't do, I can't imagine what the issue is going to be. But, you can always be surprised. That's the amazing thing about science.
Well, let me ask you this, Vincent, because mRNA technologies, again, it was never, it's like taking the Ferrari to go to the grocery store. It's a really expensive way of delivering a vaccine. But it's mainly used for genetic conditions where the patient is not making a particular protein. But that's been around for a long time, right? Do you know the exact year when they started doing trials on the mRNA technology for that particular use?
Well, it's never been used in people for that. The mRNA vaccines are the first licensed version of that. But 20 years ago, people were trying to figure out how to get an mRNA that would not be basically rejected. So when you put mRNA into people, you have an immune response that clears it. And they had to figure out the chemistry to change the mRNA to avoid that. And they did. And Kiriko Catalin and Drew Weissman at Penn were among the people who figured that out. And so now the result is mRNA vaccines. But Moderna was basically trying to make a cancer mRNA vaccine for years, and it never worked. They never got anywhere, and then they got somewhere when they
did clinical trials, did they not?
They did, but no effect, no positive effect.
Exactly, so. But they did it. This isn't new. What I'm trying to establish is this is not new. Like, we've been trying it, just not for vaccines.
It depends what you mean by new, right? If you have a licensed product in millions of people, then it's new, right? Because that's never happened before. Because the trials are in very few numbers of people. I want to look at Dominic's, he's going back to your cheerleader thing. He says, countering vaccine hesitation with organized marketing will have the opposite effect. People are suspicious because of the money involved. Throwing out polished marketing would increase suspicion. What do you think about it? That's with respect to your cheerleader approach, right?
And I think that is a possibility, but I would argue that the current state of advertising is so bad that you've got to try anything, even if people know that it's a gimmick, or they know that that I proposed it or whatever. You have to try anything at this point, because the bar is so low and things are so bad right now that you don't have any other choice.
Yep. So, and Simon says, so the sports route is a good problem. The problem is there are sports stars like the tennis guy, Djokovic, who push healthy and refuse vaccines. Remember, they wouldn't let him play in the Australian Open because he wouldn't get vaccinated. And so, some sports people will not do it. And you may have a problem. There may be one person on the football team who doesn't like it, and you can't do it. So, but that's your problem when you go to try it, right, Desiree?
Yeah, well, here's the thing. So I actually think the NFL teams will be pretty responsive to this, because as far as I know, they do vaccinate their team, and they are heavily sponsored by pharmaceutical companies. So I can't imagine that an NFL team, professional team, would not want to at least entertain running a pilot program like this, especially when it's gonna help public health.
So, Andrew says we also need campaigns aimed at nervous parents who are not going to go to football games, right? So we have to have other things that'll get them, for sure.
And that's where the other forms of advertisements come into play, because the flu shot cheerleaders is really just for a particular demographic in the sports sector, right? That's only one piece of a bigger puzzle. So what needs to be done is, again, like I said, painting a better picture of the pharmaceutical companies through other advertisements, not just directed towards males under 45, right? So again, if anyone works at Pfizer, email me. I'll send you the deck. But I think that could be a huge first step in combating that as well. And I think as more people, what we really need, and I would love if we could get more celebrities involved with this, where they're doing more public advocacy, because there really isn't, they're like getting Jennifer Aniston, who's pro-vaccine, or Kim Kardashian, getting them out there and talking about this and being advocates for this, because no one's really, on the celebrity side, no one's really doing anything to help.
So Elizabeth says, I think it could work in some areas. It would have to be really targeted, and they should consider some kind of protection for the cheerleaders in case of ugly pushback. Yeah.
And that's fair. That's fair. But even the NFL teams that actually have cheerleaders, they have to have security for those girls too. So
sure.
Either way, you're going to want to do it. But I really don't think you're necessarily going to have a lot of people attacking a bunch of young women just trying to better the public health.
And Aerozone says, wow, Desiree, as sexist as the cheerleader concept is, I'm with you that it could work. Purdue Pharma, to market OxyContin, created a sales force of hot girl co-eds to persuade doctors to write prescriptions.
And wow. It worked.
Wow.
What do you think they did with Viagra? There was a whole movie about that. Same thing. It worked. And that's my whole point in the marketing deck. I talk about that. I'm like, everyone knows that the pharmaceutical companies have the hottest sales reps for a reason, because it works. So I think they need to leverage that and put that into the vaccine advertisements and policies.
Lori says, I think many don't get the flu shot because they just don't bother. But if it was easy, like at a football game, they just might.
Yep.
And
especially yep.
Doreen says, I agree, this could work. Jock who cares, kind of like walking a cute dog, can be a girl magnet. Yeah, right. Yeah, that's right. Walking a dog is a good way to strike up conversations, right? John,
exactly.
John, thank you for your support of science communication here at Microbe TV. We always need your support to do our work. You can do the super chat, which is a little button below, or you can do the Venmo, which you see above Desiree's head there. Our address is at Microbe TV. We really appreciate your support, and when you support us financially, we know you like what we do. It's great.
Thank you, John.
Let's see. We need multiple approaches, including this. Nothing works on everyone. I don't need convincing beyond data, but still enjoy the Shingrix shingles doesn't care marketing.
I had not heard of that. No,
but I have seen
I'll have to look that up.
I have seen some ads on Instagram for the RSV vaccine. And,
really?
Yeah, it's very interesting how these companies are going about it, and those are pretty funny. They're, RSV can be really bad and so forth. It's pretty scary. So,
I'll have to watch them. But yeah, that's if I think using humor definitely can go a long way to combating vaccine hesitancy.
So here there was one here. Let's see. Oh, Doreen wants to know the virus on Daniel's bow tie last week. I'll try to ask him, Doreen. I don't remember, but I will try and ask him. What do we? Oh, yeah. So this is how many pairs of shoes in 10 grand. That's a good question. Oh, so Dean wants to know if you're a virologist. Why don't you tell people your background? Because you wouldn't call yourself a virologist, right?
No. So after 2009, I went back to school and got a degree in biochemistry and molecular biology, and heavily studied virology and immunology, and kind of used that to formulate my hypothesis on what actually happened in 2009 to me. And that's where, it really fell mostly on immunology and having a genetic predisposition to autoimmune disease. So no, I'm more of like a virology nerd, I would say.
You used to listen to TWIV, right?
Yes, a lot.
So, principal manager asks an interesting question. Have any behavioral economists done any work on vaccine psychology of judgment and decision making? I just finished
Wow.
reading. Thinking Fast and Slow, right? Which is all about the decision making and
Mm-hmm.
how we have two brains. We have a fast reacting one and a slower one that takes longer to think about things. And those he didn't address that at all. But I'll bet there are people who study it, principal manager. I just am not aware of it.
Yeah, and that's kind of interesting because I studied economics, and for a time in 2007, I was a financial advisor at Morgan Stanley. So we did a lot of, economic models and research in that. And one interesting thing kind of about that is, if you remember when the COVID-19 vaccines came out, there was almost like not a lottery, but there was a limited supply of them, right? And that limited supply drove demand. People were jumping in line and paying people to get vaccines. And that sense of scarcity actually increased the demand for vaccines. So on that note, it would be terrible to do this, but almost like you almost want to drive scarcity because it'll increase
Yeah.
vaccination rates. And it's sad that you have to do that, but that's what I noticed about the beginning of the COVID vaccine releases, is that when there was that scarcity, you had people jumping the line trying to get it.
Oh, I remember. Yeah, I remember when it was winter, you had to stand outside, and some people got very sick. Some older people got very sick because it was cold and so forth. What a tragedy this whole thing was. So,
Yeah, but you didn't hear a lot of people say, "Oh, I'm not going to get it." You heard people say, "Oh, I got the vaccine. I had a friend and I cut in
yeah.
line." Like it became like this really cool thing to try and do. Like, let's try to get this scarce product.
So
So
is
from
that the
the
solution?
economics,
Is that the
I it's
solution
a
to not
it's a
make it
super
available to everyone, saying you can't
I
have
don't
this?
No, it's not, but it just goes back to the behavioral mentality in economics, right? So scarcity drives demand. So it's
Yeah.
interesting from that perspective, but no, I don't think it's the right thing to do. It's too dangerous.
So Elizabeth says Jenny McCarthy used to be very public about being anti-vax. She even wrote a book about it. Wasn't her kid autistic?
Apparently, her kid's not autistic anymore. I don't know what happened, but
Oh,
he's
really?
cured, I guess. Um, but yes, she used to be very public, but I think she probably has a PR person that's like, you need to tone this down if you want to keep working on the Masked Singer. So
Hmm.
what she does now is, it looks like she kind of does it in the shadows.
So, principal manager's question about the decision making. Dan Ariel has done some research. He may have a book coming out. Okay, that's good. Thank you.
That's great.
Lori says, I have watched a few YouTube videos that have a subtle anti-vax message. They can be very alluring. If I didn't have microbe TV, I might believe them. The old kernel of truth trick.
And that's another big problem, is that these social media platforms, they are a large part of why people get sucked into the anti-vax cult. Is their algorithms, their AI driven algorithms will feed you this content, and if they see that you engage with it, they feed you more of it. So it really helps indoctrinate and brainwash people faster. And it's a shame that, the social media companies feel the need to train their artificial intelligence algorithms to do this to people, because they are actually a large part of the blame as well, is the AI systems feeding people crap.
So Catherine writes, as a conservative Christian Republican, I don't follow the anti-vaxxers, no conspiracy theories. I trust Dr. Fauci. Good for you.
Yeah, good for you.
You don't all have to follow what they tell you to follow.
No, you don't. But there are some real strong Republicans who are in belief of the vaccines, but slowly it's starting to switch the other way, because if you've watched Fox News lately, they're talking a lot more about they're using the vaccines and COVID-19 as a political ploy, a political strategy to further pull people apart. So I really hope that Fox News stops doing that. If you're just going to continue to tear down the public health system, just don't talk about it. Find some other, you just talk about Hunter Biden, please. Just leave the vaccines out of this.
Did you know that today is Constitution Day 2023? I did not. Thank you for reminding us, Patricia.
Thank you.
Thank you. Let's see. Dr. Michael Osterholm. I know Vincent isn't a big fan. Explained some technical reasons in the virus why he was only moderately concerned about avian flu. That's unusual because he's usually he's a worrier. He always gets people worried. But as we have just concluded, we should be prepared anyway, no matter what, right?
Yeah, we should. And this is the best time to do it. When we have something that could potentially spread, may not, but at least it's there and in the back of our heads and forcing us to start thinking about pandemic preparations.
Tourist says, is an antiviral different from vaccines? Do we have any now? Yes, we have both antivirals and vaccines for many viruses. We have over 40 antivirals for HIV/AIDS alone. We have antivirals for herpes viruses, flu. We have SARS-CoV-2 antivirals, hepatitis B, lots of them, and of course many vaccines too.
Well, can you explain what exactly they do? Because a lot of them, like protease inhibitors, correct? Some of them are.
So some of many of the antivirals are protease inhibitors. Proteases are proteins that cut other proteins like a pair of scissors, and you can make antivirals that block that. Then there are antivirals that block the protein that copies the genome of the virus, the nucleic acid. Those are two big ones. Well, many of the HIV/AIDS are reverse transcriptase inhibitors. You have some entry inhibitors like CCR5 inhibitors. So lots of different targets. It's really cool stuff.
Yeah. So the basic difference is vaccines to prevent you or to prepare you for infection. And you may not even realize you're infected after you've had a vaccine. But the antivirals are there for when you get the infection and you're symptomatic. So that's the real big difference between the two.
Right. And that's in general, that's the case. The vaccines will prepare you to prevent the disease. And
yes.
And the antiviral you usually take after you get infected and you start to show symptoms. However, there is an exception, of course. You can do pre-exposure prophylaxis for HIV/AIDS. PrEP, if you are at high risk for being infected, you can take a pill the night before, the day before, right? And that will prevent you from getting infected. And when pregnant mothers who are HIV positive are about to give birth, we give them some antiviral to lower their viral load so they won't transmit it to the baby. So a couple of interesting uses there.
And there's a point I want to make about vaccines, because I think people get confused on what vaccines' role really is. The vaccine's role is to introduce your body to this pathogen, to this enemy, so that when you are infected with it, you're actually able to fight it off. So it's not that you're not going to get an infection. What it means is when you do get exposed to the virus, you've got an entire team of warriors behind you and a kamikaze to actually fight it off, right? So I think there's a big public misconception on what vaccines actually do.
BC says, I love radical game theory to fight infectious diseases. You know, there are some games out there about combating infectious diseases, right? There was one called Pandemic years ago that I used to assign to my classes, and there are others where you can try and kill everyone with infections and all sorts of. So there are a bunch out there. It's very cool.
Yeah, and like I said, it would be cool to do a live stream, a war game where we actually come up with a simulated scenario and work with local officials and healthcare providers in that area and figure out, okay, how would we deal with this? And then we can live stream it kind of like what we're doing now and get the public's feedback and questions.
Patricia says, I'm from the Deep South and sorry, religious exemptions are bogus. I agree. I just, because I know someone who is a construction guy. He said, I don't take vaccines. My religion forbids me from putting things into my body. I said, well, wait a minute. Do you put food in your body? Do you put alcohol and drinks? I mean, come on, that's ridiculous.
That's so funny you said that. In the Pfizer deck I created for their marketing, I do have a slide about that. It's a bit that I call hypocrisy, and I'll run you through it real quickly. So basically I have two women, they're eating lunch in the cafeteria at work, and the one woman is eating a salad and drinking a bottle of water, and the second woman is eating those cheesy puffs and a hot dog and a super octane energy drink. And the healthy woman is asking the other woman, hey, are you going to go get vaccinated today? I saw the sign-up sheet got emailed out. And the woman who's eating unhealthy says, oh, I'd never put that in my body. And she takes a big sip of super Death Star octane energy drink.
There you go.
So that's the kind of humor we need to use with marketing to call out these hypocrisies, because then people would be like, oh, that's a good point. I'm drinking and eating every day, something that is for sure going to give me a disease, yet I'm afraid to get a vaccine that's going to prevent me from getting a disease, one vaccine a year. That hypocrisy needs to be shown very visually and illustrated to people so that they better understand.
Desiree, I noticed here, do I have the accent on the right E there on your name?
It's on the incorrect E, but that's okay.
No, we got to fix it. I know how to do it. Option E. I know how to do that.
It's French, so you have the E.
Yeah, there you go. That's correct. I just noticed it. See, at least I picked it up.
Oh, thank you.
John says, I saw we defunded surveillance for emerging viruses. I had better hope for this admin. So yes, USAID, U.S. Agency for International Development, had a $125 million program to do screening of wildlife for novel viruses, and they decided that it was too dangerous to do that, and it would increase the chances of introducing viruses into people, which I find absurd.
Ridiculous. Yeah.
You need to know what's out there. The way it's done really decreases the likelihood that you're going to infect yourself. So I think they're bowing to political pressures, right?
They are. But the good news is, good and bad news is the next pandemic, I don't think you need surveillance for, because it's all in migratory birds right now. So just grab one of them and start swapping.
Look at Desiree. Desiree is saying the next pandemic is going to be avian flu. So we'll see. I don't think it'll be avian. I think it'll be some other kind of
probably another virus. SARS. Yeah, it's possible.
I'll bet it's a canine influenza. We'll see, because a lot of people have dogs who are getting influenza viruses from people, but it will be some kind of flu. But within the next 10 years, there will be a flu pandemic.
And that's the one I'm worried about. I'm worried about an influenza pandemic because it's more infectious, is it not, compared to SARS-CoV-2 or just the SARS in general?
What, influenza virus?
Yeah, isn't it more infectious typically?
No, I think that they're
about the same.
They're comparable. Yeah, yeah, they're comparable. Let's see, what else do we have here? I'd like to see Mad Max doctors with mohawks and lab coats on the backs of motorcycles with vaccine dart guns to do drive-by vaccinations or cheerleaders, but that's me. That's funny.
I love it. You should talk to Pfizer with me. That would be amazing. But that's the kind of funny humor you need to counter the vaccine disinformation and hesitancy, is funny stuff like that.
So glutaminergic neuron, what a great name.
Yeah, I love that.
What are your opinions on AAV-based gene therapies? So I like AAV-based gene therapies, right? The one that I like a lot that's been licensed is a therapy to cure a form of inherited blindness, right? They inject, so the people who have it's called Leber's congenital
They inject
blindness.
it in the spinal cord, correct?
No, they inject it into the back of
Directly
your,
into the eye.
to the
Okay.
retina, into the
Oh,
retina.
I'm thinking of,
And that's another disease for spinal,
yeah, for
something
walking, spinal,
which is
yeah.
like one of the most expensive gene therapies ever. I think it's $3 million
It's like,
for the treatment.
yeah, the eyes, I believe, are 1 or 2 million to get that therapy
To get
done.
both. So they inject it in the eye and it works. It really does work. So I
Yep.
think it's great. And you say, what about the implementation of efficacious tissue-specific capsids with unknown receptor targets? Well, they're not unknown. They're designed to target specific tissues, and they're extensively tested to make sure that they do that. So I agree. If you didn't know the target, that would not be a great idea to put it in people, but we do know the targets. Mr. Neuron or Miss
Well,
Neuron.
what's interesting too, I don't think a lot of people appreciate, and the reason why mainly it's only been able to be used in the eyes and in the spinal cord is those are immune privileged areas. Is that not correct, Vincent? So you don't have really much of a robust immune response in those areas, which allows for.
They are the interior of the eye and the spinal cord and brain are immunoprivileged sites. You don't have a huge response. That's absolutely right. So that's part of it. But you also inject it right in there, and that helps too, right?
Yeah, of course. But you don't have as much of you don't really have as much of immune reaction, which is why they're able to do it in those two areas. That's mainly why it's only been extended to the spinal cord and the eyes, is that immunoprivileged.
Simon says the problem is the long COVID advocates keep saying the vaccine does almost nothing to prevent long COVID, which is not correct. Some studies have shown it impacts long COVID, but they don't believe you. You say it and they say you're lying. I mean, this is all they can do is to say you're lying. And what are you going to say? That's why we can't debate any of these issues, because they'll just say you're a liar and then it ends there, right?
And that's why that's kind of like what I went back to when I was saying that we need to find loopholes to that, or we need to find workarounds. So if they're just going to keep throwing stuff at that, the point is to stop arguing with them. Just find a different route. And I think by changing the advertisements and changing the perception of vaccines in general, we can do more to combat that, because you're gonna it's like talking to a rock. You're never gonna get anywhere, so you might as well just stop and come up with a new direction.
Amy wants to know why it's so difficult to get Novavax. Well, they have production problems, and the company is in Chapter 11. That doesn't help. They're going out of business, and so it's hard to make a product when you can't make enough and you're going out of business. So there you go. I'm sorry you can't find it. I think a lot of it was sent overseas.
That's right. I forgot about that. To other
markets as well. And there was one here. Here's John. This is great. I honestly was pensive about mRNA before seeing the Baltimore system for the first time, which John for sure found on my course, my video virology course, the Baltimore scheme for classifying viruses, and it puts mRNA in the middle. Everything goes to mRNA. That's funny, John. I really like that.
We never heard back from the individual who said, it was Andy, who said he was hesitant about the mRNA. He never got back to us, did he?
Nope.
I'm just curious what his hesitation was.
Yeah, Andy did not answer, probably left. Okay, let's see. your thoughts about the new COVID variant. How about the new released FDA COVID vaccine? Oh, this is so the CDC recommends everybody over 6 months of age get this new booster, which is XBB.1.15, I think it is.
Yeah, because they just got the FDA approval for that. Pfizer at least did a couple days ago, it looked like.
So Paul Offit says he doesn't agree and he doesn't think it's for everybody. And Tony Fauci says, yeah, let's keep it simple. Everybody just go get it. So Fauci's approach is, if we make a complicated immunization scheme, it's going to confuse people. Just tell everyone to get it, right?
And that's the whole point with the messaging. It needs to be in sync and it needs to be consistent. And we really need everybody to be on the same page. I plan on getting it just because I'm pretty sure I had COVID in the very beginning. And I remember for weeks, I was just completely weak and leveled, and every time I tried to even go for a walk or exercise, I was out for days. I don't want to feel that again, so I am going to go get that COVID booster. I cannot stand being sick.
Let's see. Dominic says, because places report that spike is found in the blood after the vaccine. Is this inaccurate or badly expressed? No, it is in the blood. And it's retained. Most of it stays in the site of injection. A little bit gets into the blood. And that probably is what goes to the heart and causes myocarditis in a few cases per 100,000. That's probably it, but we don't know for sure because we don't know the sequence of events. But yes.
But the myocarditis is also caused by the virus itself.
Sure.
So we have to be very careful with that.
Absolutely.
Because people are thinking it's from the vaccine. No, it's actually because of the virus. And I had a friend who got the vaccine and had something similar happen, but then actually contracted COVID and had that happen again. So it really pointed to it was the virus causing the myocarditis and not the vaccine, because when you get the vaccine, you're just building immunity to the virus.
So yes, you can get myocarditis both from an infection, COVID, SARS-CoV-2 infection, or the vaccine, but it's far more prevalent with the virus. Yes, the vaccine is 5 per 100,000, I think. I could be wrong. So like anything in life, there's no free ride, right? There's always a cost-benefit thing that you have to figure out. So if you decide that the risk of myocarditis is too much for you, you can get a Novavax. Or if you can't get Novavax, I don't know what to tell you.
But you should get something, because the myocarditis might be worse in an actual infection with the virus than it would be if you got the vaccine.
You should not get infected. No, it's not a good thing.
Yeah, because again, the myocarditis was being caused by the virus.
That's correct. Okay, let's see what else we have. Andrew says, any new technology will inspire fear. Socrates was against writing. Today we just decided mobile phones are not as dangerous as the conspiracists said. Isn't that one of the things RFK said, is that our mobile phones cause brain cancer or something like that? I think he said that in one of his Rogan interview.
The 5G, right? Oh,
yeah, the 5G,
God.
yeah.
Yeah, it's so funny, these conspiracy theories. I'm surprised more people aren't worried about AI. Instead, they're picking on 5G. But yeah, anything new that comes out, people are afraid of, and then they create these conspiracy theories.
I gotta say, I agree. I don't like conspiracy theories around vaccines and biologics, but when I was a kid, I loved the conspiracy theories surrounding JFK's assassination. Now, you're too young to remember that.
I do remember.
So they thought the party line is that, it was Lee Harvey Oswald in the Texas textbook repository shot him. But then there were these conspiracy theorists who said, no, there was a second gunman on the grassy knoll, right? And I went to a talk at Cornell when I was a student by a guy who got the film. It was called the Zapruder film, an 8mm color film of the assassination, which he said showed that a shot came from in front. And I just ate that up. as a young kid who didn't know anything, right? So it's very easy to get sucked into
It
conspiracies.
is, and I was on Debunk the Funk with Dr. Wilson. We talked about that because when he was younger in high school, he got pulled into the 9/11 conspiracy theories.
Yeah,
So this
that's
it's
right.
very alluring because it's like this secret thing that the government's hiding from you, and it's like a puzzle you have to solve and figure out like how deep does this go. So it's very alluring, and people can easily, the smartest, most well-meaning people can get pulled into it.
Patricia asks, is it accurate to say that mutations in SARS-2 do not make the virus any more or less weak or virulent in humans? So that's what I have always contested, Patricia, that there's no good evidence that the viral changes. I think it's all population immunity that's making a difference, and that if the population is immune, you have less disease in the beginning of the outbreak, less immunity, more disease. But people like to blame mutation all the time, and it's hard for me to counter that. It was, oh yeah, John says, I like when Vincent would bring the 3D printed capsid structures. Yeah, I brought them all to the incubator, but I do have one.
Oh, fantastic.
I have one left. Unfortunately, I brought them all to the incubator because I thought I do most shows there, and that's where they should be. But anyway, this is a 3D printed SARS-CoV-2. It's kind of, it's not very colorful, but it glows in the dark, so
Oh,
let's
there's
see.
that.
Let me see. Let's see if it'll glow. Let's see if I turn the lights out here, if it glows. You ready? Not really that much,
Not
right?
really. No,
That's
unfortunately.
just my
Oh,
hair light.
who produced that for you? Where did you get that made?
Oh, so this was made by Mark Martin, who was here earlier. And let me show you
Oh,
another
okay.
virus that he made for me. Oh.
So he 3D prints these?
Yes, exactly. He 3D prints them. And look at this one. This is very cool. This is a bacteriophage. Now watch
That's cool.
this. This has a light inside of it. See? Now this one we're going to turn the light off for because that's cool. Look at that. How cool is that? Thank you.
How do you buy one of those?
You have to talk to Mark Martin. He might send you one.
Oh my God, I love that.
It's got different
Mark,
frequencies.
let me know. Let me know I can buy one of those.
Yeah, but Desiree wants a 3D printed phage that flashes. So I'm sorry, John, that you don't see them very often. Yeah. Okay, let's see what else we have there. We have 10 minutes left. Let's get through these questions here. You having fun, Desiree?
I am. This is great.
Yeah, so Tom says
These
also
are great questions.
the idea that vaccines prevent infection has been a long-standing misapprehension. It didn't emerge with COVID, though it might have been amplified. Yes, they prevent disease. And I think COVID amplified it substantially, but it was always there. I agree with you.
Well, even in college, a lot of students in the biochemistry program, they didn't know that either. They didn't quite understand that it's to prevent, to prevent serious illness upon infection.
So Jessica says, Desiree, I wear a size 9.5. Can you loan me a pair? I want to flex.
Of course, Jessica. Tell you what, we can make a Nordstrom date and go together.
Unfortunately, Jessica's in Ohio. Yeah, she's in Ohio. But if you go to ASV next year, you'll meet her because Jessica's going to go to ASV.
Well, then I will be there, Jessica. I don't wear 9.5, but we'll figure something out. Maybe we can have Mark 3D print some for us.
Yeah, unfortunately, Mark is gone because he would have said something already. Yeah, but Aaron Rodgers might disagree with the NFL idea. I don't think he has any say in the matter, right?
No, he doesn't. He doesn't. Largely, the NFL teams have been pretty pro-vaccine. I mean, you have to be. You don't want your players getting sick and not being able to play. They pay these guys millions of dollars. The last thing they want them wiped out is with a flu or COVID.
Mm-hmm. About Desiree's advice to use humor, I'm going to buy a bag of flaming hot Funyuns to help address with humor the I don't know what's in it concern. No, I don't know what a flaming hot Funyun is. So do you,
I
Desiree?
love it, Doreen. Yeah, it's like the worst thing you could possibly eat. But apparently that's okay to consume and put in your body, but not a vaccine.
Wow. It's really bad. What is it, sweet? Something sweet?
It's highly ultra processed. I don't even know if there's onions in it. It's just all
Uh,
processed food.
Farhad says, is there any way to prolong the IgG elevation after vaccination, or can we design something to have this effect? So I
Mm.
don't think so, Farhad, because that's the way the immune system works for a reason. The antibody and T cell levels go up, and then they go down because you don't want to have high levels all the time. That would not be a good thing.
That would
So,
cause inflammation, right? But
yeah,
it's no, normally the T cells, the memory T cells that keep that immunity going for
yes, you
long
have
term
memory
immunity.
cells, B and T cells that will come be activated later, and the problem is there's always a delay. So the virus will
Mhm.
get in, it'll replicate a little, and then the memory cells get activated. But by then you've already shed a little virus, right, and transmitted it. So it's not perfect, but the thing is you're protected against severe disease. So the immune system
Yes,
has evolved to allow a little bit of infection, but to protect you from severe disease. And to me, that makes a lot of sense, right? Save the
I agree.
organism. What about commercials that explain basics of immunization with cool computer animation, simplify the science so people can understand?
I think that's an awesome idea. That is the biggest problem that I think the scientists face. The scientists who are trying to get the science across is that they don't have training in how to communicate these difficult concepts, complex concepts to lay people, and that's part of where I think actually it would be really neat to do computer animation and use analogies to explain the science to people. I think that's another aspect that could help tackle vaccine disinformation. That's a great idea, Lori.
Andrew says, interestingly, as far as I know, only the U.S. and New Zealand allow advertising for prescription medicines. I didn't know. I just
I
know
think
that.
that's correct. I think that's largely correct. Yes. Because Pfizer did an ad campaign for the COVID-19 booster not too long ago where they're using celebrities. But unfortunately, the call to action in those advertisements is not very robust. And I think they just fell flat.
I just remember when I was a kid, I never saw ads on TV for drugs. Never. But we had,
I
I
don't
don't know
think they were
if,
allowed back then.
yeah, but we did have ads for cigarettes. I don't know if anyone remembers, but those
Yeah.
went. Those went.
And actually, that's a good point. Do you remember? I believe in the early 2000s, there was that truth campaign that was directed at the cigarette companies and cigarettes, where it was a really effective campaign that basically tried to paint and very successfully through humor and through emotional eliciting strong emotions got people, I'm sorry, to see cigarettes in a new light, and it really went a long way of
Hmm.
tackling cigarette smoke. So something like that, I think, put towards vaccinations and vaccines, I think could be really helpful here.
Do vaccines always have to be injections? No, it can
No.
be taken orally. The oral polio vaccine is taken orally on a sugar cube. The flu
Mm-hmm.
mist is sprayed into your nose. So there are now microneedle patches that you
Yes,
put on
yes,
your arm with a band-aid. Those will be coming in the next few years. Did you
right.
hear anything
Because
about that at
this
your conference, Desiree?
Yeah, well, no, they didn't talk about that at the conference, but I've been reading studies about scarification, because that is actually that's how the very first vaccines developed. You know,
Yeah.
they made a cut in your arm and it exposed the virus through there. And what people don't realize is that there's a whole immune system through your skin. So by going through the skin, you're actually getting a more robust immune response, because you're getting all these new layers of immune response that you don't normally get with an intramuscular injection. And then on the point of the mucosal vaccines, that's why it's important, the work of like GSD Bio, the nonprofit, in developing the bacteriophage technology, so that countries that can't afford to do the Gucci platform mRNA technology can actually be able to quickly develop proteins and deliver those mucosally.
I didn't know this. Plague Incorporated, who the company that makes the video game, donated $300,000 to COVID vaccine research. Good for them.
Oh, wow. That's
I like
fantastic.
that.
I did not know that.
That's really nice. Well, I think it's
Yeah.
time for us to wrap up. I want to thank Doreen for your contribution to science communication. Thank you, Doreen.
Thank you, Doreen.
Really appreciate it. And I would like to, I think there's one more comment I wanted to highlight here. Vanity Nutrition says the first pharma commercial was May 19th, 1983 for Motrin.
Wow.
Thank you, Vanity.
Thank you.
And thanks to all of our moderators tonight. We had Vanity Nutrition, we had Tom, we had Andrew, we had Les, and we had Steph SF. I think I got everyone. Did I say Andrew? Well, I'll say it again because I've missed you before. Thank you so much for coming and spending 2 hours with us.
Yes, thank you, everyone.
Keeping this civilized. And thanks to all of you. Right now we have 145 people, 133 likes. Good job, everyone. Really appreciate it. And we will be back next week at the same time, next Wednesday, 8 p.m. And Desiree, thank you for joining us. Really appreciate it.
Of course. Thank you so much for having me.
And good luck with your cheerleader scheme and with trying to debunk all the anti-vaccine nonsense.
I appreciate that. It's a lot of work. So I appreciate everyone here for trying to help with that also.
Thanks, everybody. Until next week, be
you.
safe. Good night, folks.